Welcome back to the Eric Krown Crypto channel, wishing you a happy and healthy and also very early macro Sunday morning over here. As I wanted to get this video out quickly, a few big things to be aware of for this next week to come, some major pivots on price action, and maybe even a little bit on the short-term time frames as well. So again, because it is Sunday, I'm going to be focusing on the higher term time frames, and I do want to keep this one kind of nice and short and sweet, as I want the main information to be, well, hopefully as poignant as possible. Other than that, wishing you the best as always, and let's just get right into it. So I want to start off today's analysis by actually looking at the global open interest chart. I think this is actually rather telling right here, because you can see that the global open interest, which represents the opened leveraged positions, is at levels, technically speaking, about 6 billion. That we really haven't seen since 2020. Now, when I say 2020, unfortunately on this particular chart, we only go a year back, but I can assure you that the last time we saw these levels this low, Bitcoin was trading at about 8, 9, maybe even 10,000 bucks in the summer to end portion of 2020. So what does that essentially mean? It essentially means that we have seen the great deleveraging of this market. We have seen a massive reset, maybe not the great reset as a lot of people are aware of, but we have seen a humongous reset as far as leverage positions go, which I do believe was one of the main propositions of this particular point within the market cycle. Now, the market cycle, as far as I'm concerned, was kind of let's say exacerbated during the Rona times, when the Fed essentially created a liquidity bubble because their response to it was to essentially kick the can down the road, not have to deal with the immediate effects of a very likely recession, and instead just print the hell out of the US dollar and well, get us into the mess that we've been in for the last couple of years. So now that we've seen that happen, I do believe that the next phase is very likely to occur, as I've kind of been saying, for, within these next few months here, very likely Q1 of this year of 2023. With that in mind, I still want to stick by my statement that I do believe it's very unlikely Bitcoin trades and closes on a higher term time frame below the current lows before trying to the upside. So again, that could incorporate another retest somewhere around the lows, but ultimately, I'm not even leaning towards that right now, to be honest with you. But ultimately, Bitcoin very likely trades above the current range highs. Now, the range between about 15.5 to about 18.5 is what I'm talking about right here on the higher term time frame. So again, this is a good indication that we have seen a major resetting, and we're probably going to see a nice little bounce based upon that, a counter trend move, if you will. Anyways, let's now get into the actual charts and start it off over here. This is the 2-day time frame chart, and I just want to keep this one just nice and short and sweet, and hopefully as simple as possible. And in this case, you can very easily see on the charts that Bitcoin is working on a higher low as of right now on the 2-day time frame. You could probably even put it on a 5-day time frame, or even a weekly as well. Maybe less so on a weekly, but ultimately I think the 2-day time frame is just the easiest to kind of see in this case. And yes, this is not confirmed as of right now. So the big thing to be watching for, the next major thing on the higher term time frames, would be a closure above about 17,250, 17,300, depending upon your exchange, of course, on a higher term time frame. If you see something like that, that would confirm this as a low, a secondary low, a higher low, the first higher low that Bitcoin's seen in a very long time. And at that point, very likely to retest somewhere around the highs of December. So that would put Bitcoin in, let's say, the shallow $18,000 territory. Again, that's contingent upon a closure above this level right here. That would essentially confirm that as the higher low. On top of that, we still do see that there is extreme lows on volatility. We'll kind of get to that a little bit later. And we do see that the 2-day jewel is getting that liftoff and good curvature on what would be considered a pretty damn powerful signal right here. Similar to what we saw back on over before the September rally, which did take a lot of time to play out, admittedly, between this area right here, where the signal was actually in progress, to the actual high that we did see in November. So it was quite some time, obviously. A lot of sideways in between. And we could still see some more sideways here as well. Definitely very possible. But ultimately, I do think that Bitcoin is putting in another move like that. But just like the past one, does that necessarily mean that Bitcoin's going to go to the bull fucking moon and beyond? I think that would be, again, not proper to say just yet. These rallies can obviously vary very likely fail, at some point. So moving on into the next chart, let's get into this chart, the fundamental chart, the accumulation distribution indicator chart. I've gone over this a million times. I do want to come at this from a slightly different angle. Credit to Mr. Gritters for bringing this one up because it's just something new and a little bit of hopium here as well. Anyways, first let me explain the accumulation distribution indicator, essentially the net delta indicator on traded volume. And what essentially do we see here? Well, what we see is that anytime this indicator has a slope change in the extreme high or the extreme low territory, that has marked off, well, macro highs and macro lows. Especially works relatively well to the, on the downside to upside reversals. So in the red zone right here. And do I have it on this chart? No, I don't have it on this chart. Do I have it on this chart? I have it on this chart. Nice. You can see right here, I've marked off those slope change reversals, and they have correlated incredibly well with prior macro lows, as you can see. And if we could plot the one in 2011, it would have been over here, by the way. Anyways, more important to the point is that while the slope change is more of an indication of the actual shift in momentum from from down to up, well, the thing is that the slope change happens after the actual low is put in. So in this case, it gets pretty close to the actual low. You can see within a few months over here, within a couple months over here, less so over here, but definitely around the lows. I would say this is like close enough, basically. That would be a very, very powerful signal that that Bitcoin is ready to begin the next try to the upside, the next major try to the upside after basically a full year to the downside. I mean, in the past year, there's really only one major bounce that I'd really call like a traditional bull trap on a higher term time frame, and that was the 30,000 to 48,000 bounce over here. After that, that was, well, just straight down yet again. So I do think that we're probably getting ready for another one of those, major bounces. Again, you can have major bounces within the overall context of a downwards bear market, similar to what we saw back on over in 2019 over here, by the way. It did ultimately set in a higher low, which I think is what the Boolahs hope for coming off of this next segment. But, it did retest very, very close to the prior lows. I mean, that was obviously the Rona jump over here. Now, the new information, or the information that I haven't necessarily spoken about, is over here on the CME chart. Now, the CME chart is not one that has the full history. So I would say that a great counterpoint to what I'm about to say is that this is hopium, because we really only have seen kind of half of a cycle right here. So there's not enough data to really fully analyze it. But if I wanted to make somewhat of an analysis, I would say, hey, if we're looking at the slope of the accumulation distribution indicator on CME, it is pretty much flat here. Now, when I say flat, I mean pretty much flat. It's actually not entirely flat. So even that is a bit of a stretch. But as you can see from the Rona times over here, it was kind of the same curvature, kind of the same slope, if you will, before turning back up on this particular low, similar to this low over here. Let me just mark them off. Boom, I'm talking about this one versus this one over here. So perhaps that precipitates what we expect to see in spot price action, and knowing that spot price action essentially gets that slope change after the actual low is put in. Could it be reasonable to say that Bitcoin's probably put in a major low here? Yes, I do think so, especially when we go back on over here and we realize that the current slope has reduced in its severity greatly, I would say. One of the greatest reductions since, since the whole thing started going down. So again, we do kind of expect something like that before turning it around. Obviously, I mean, it's got to be one thing before the next. You kind of saw the same thing over here. Certainly saw the same thing over here. Same thing over here. Same thing over here, right? So that's, again, a little bit more on the hopium side, but I do think, worth some consideration. Anyways, moving on to the next chart, I want to go back to the 2-day time frame chart. There's nothing new here that we haven't spoken about from yesterday. It's again the same volatility versus stochastic momentum signature, but it will be closing tonight. So I did want to update or just remind you of the 2-day time frame pivot. By the way, still bouncing off this trend line, governing the last few lows from September and November. And this will remain with upside curvature if Bitcoin closes today above 16,530. So that would be the new number to be watchful of. Still, we want to see volatility expansion over here, which is currently on the floor. So it can remain on the floor for a while longer, but as long as the stochastic is pointed to the upside, theoretically speaking, the likelihood of upside continuation is much greater than not, or at least it puts the Bulas in this position over here where these stats are relevant to the upside, not the downside. If it does start to close below that level and then we start to see volatility expansion, well, then the downside is going to be relevant now, isn't it? So again, kind of well and far away still, but something to be mindful of, because if Bitcoin essentially closes outside of the 2-day time frame range, you can expect volatility to expand. I mean, that's what volatility is fucking designed for. No expanding ranges, basically. Anyways, moving on to the last point of this analysis, or somewhat of the last point of this analysis, the weekly will close today for Bitcoin on spot price action. If Bitcoin closes above 16,630, then we will see the weekly stochastic continue to point to the upside, alongside incredible lows on volatility right here, and also perhaps work its way out of the extreme bearish controls on. And again, that will be met above 16,630. Now, the last portion of this analysis, we'll just briefly go over the lower term timeframes, because things have been like incredibly fucking boring there. But looking at the hourly right here, what are the range highs? 17,150 versus the range lows at about 16,750. Not really much going on as long as Bitcoin is between those two levels, but as long as Bitcoin is between those two levels, you will notice that it will still be on higher lows. So that is to say, as long as Bitcoin's above 16,750, Bula's still kind of in a short-term, stronger position, even though technically speaking, Bitcoin is at the range highs right now for like the 4-hour time frame. Just something to be aware of. That would also imply closing above that 17,150 level. That would be the next short-term time frame thing to be aware of. That can obviously bleed on into that 2-day time frame level that we were speaking about earlier. And at that point, yes, probably looking at relatively large move to the upside. Next sort of area of interest would be about 17.6, and then above there is, I think, like low 18s. What else should we go over quickly? Lower term time frame stochastic momentum, see what side favors what or where the pivots are. Daily pivot is still to the upside as long as Bitcoin's above 16,700. That's weird. That just aligns with the lower term time frame range lows there. 12-hour time frame is probably going to be flippy floppy, but still up as long as Bitcoin's above 16.9, which actually right now it is, but very, very close, as you can see. 6-hour time frame is going to be showing upside as long as Bitcoin's above 16,930, which Bitcoin's like literally at right now. And I would say this is a little bit more of a weaker signal. 4-hour time frame is also flippy floppy, but gonna probably or technically gonna be up right here as well, as long as Bitcoin's above 16,925. Right now it's about $15 above. And the hourly time frame is probably going to be down, if I'm going to guess. Yes, indeed it is, as long as Bitcoin's below 16,950. So all these numbers are very, 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 very close to each other. What does it essentially account for? It essentially accounts for probably more sideways. Probably more sideways. And I expect that we're going to be looking at that until real markets open tomorrow. Other than that, I'll leave you off right there. I want to be keeping this. I thought that this one was going to be nice and short and sweet. Apparently it's 13 minutes long. 13 minutes, maybe too long, perhaps. But ultimately, wishing you the best as always. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully soon.